gaming is not a crime. Welcome back to part 2 of the Almost Daily ZenCast special segment, the Incorrigible Mr Zeppo's totally irrelevant media reviews, Obi-Wan, Ben Kenobi. I want to kick off part 2 with this apparently unrelated statement and then bridge the gap. I repeat, gaming is not a crime. And I add, for inclusive conceptual purposes, writing, creating, filming, distributing, and enjoying, consuming, watching, celebrating science fiction with or without fantasy action violence in it is not a crime. It's not a thought crime. It's not a morality crime. And it's not a gateway portal that leads directly and unavoidably and nefariously to the very real gun violence we are witnessing in these here United States of America. And I say that with love, chagrin, which I've explained on the podcast before, I probably incorrectly believe should be an anthropological contraction of shit-eating grin, but irrelevant. Digressing. Why do I want to kick off the second part of this episode with that? For multiple reasons. One, not the least of which, that you're supposed to say it at the end of the list. One, I am a gamer. I've been a gamer for as long as there was a computer that could play games or a device that could play games in my house. I tried to be a board game enthusiast. You don't call them board gamers because then you sound like you're saying that they're gamers, video gamers who are bored. But that never really panned out for me in any deep sense. Monopoly just didn't cut it for me. It wasn't that intellectually stimulating or fantasy evoking. And I didn't discover a thing that really sucked me in. And at the time when I was a kid, to the best of my knowledge, there was no Magic the Gathering trading card game. And that trading card game has now been around long enough that there are kids who grew up with it because their parents were enthusiasts. That makes me feel old. But, okay, so I'm a gamer. I'm a creative that has the bold aspirational vision of writing the many silly adventures of a set of characters that will hopefully one day be presented as cinema and also explorable, enjoyable, playable as gaming content. I'm someone who shoulda, coulda, woulda in another life in parallel dimensions, neighboring in a nearby quadrant, studied programming to a professional level and built a career in development and design because it has always deeply attracted to me. But I've always, like with music, prevented myself because of my insecurities around my perceived inability to fully wrap my brain around the core language involved. Like with music, I shoulda, coulda, woulda been a musician in a rock band with guitars and drums and piano in the background. I coulda, shoulda, woulda been streaming my own original music content. Not in this universe, probably in a neighboring cluster of a toroidal probability waveform function branch that branches out from the place where I never overcame in this life my fear and paranoid, irrational, illogical resistance to comprehending and learning musical notes as a base language from which then to create art content. I have musicality in me. I have a good ear. I can sometimes sort of play music, sort of. I can pretend at it. I can fake it really good. I can lip sync like a motherfucking pro. And to my own chagrin, I'm not on any of the now apparently extremely popular lip syncing, and it is syncing, friends. not with a K, but with an C, as in synchronizing, because you're synchronizing the movement of your lips to the apparent words spoken on or sung in the audio track. Lip syncing contest shows. Sorry for the weird explanatory branch tangent there. Why am I not a contestant and or a freaking celebrity host on a show about lip syncing contests? Dear universe, I presume that in another quadrant, a neighboring set of intertwined universes, I probably am. And in the Zeppoverse, all of these might be's about the real universe are absolute assurances in the actual. That means there's literally a Zeppoverse tangent variant of Zeppo that is, the founding host of the entire genre of song contest shows, and especially the lip syncing ones where you don't sing, you just pretend to. Now, I don't know if there's any hardcore, and mind you, I'm not celebrity big enough to have ever warranted such a thing, but if there are any old school hardcore fans of mine that know the root origin of the name Zeppo and know who Mr. Zeppo was before he changed his name to Mr. Zeppo, and what that lurid theatrical history, which is woven into the fabric of the fictional Zeppoverse in a small little sidebar tangent set of stories that are part of like the question is, what is his real backstory? But for those of you who may be out there listening, you know that I not only rocked, I freaking killed it with my one, and I wish there was a really good live performance recording of it from not Edinburgh. Where did I perform this? From Gwacheong, South Korea, or the place in Italy. Where did I perform this in Italy? The Arezzo Institute for International Theatrical Physical Performance Art, or something like that. Some word salad of those kinds of theater names in Arezzo, Italy, which is a real place. Did I perform it in... I did not perform it in New York, this number. I've performed this number in Los Angeles in a couple of different venues, and I performed this number in other venues in Southern California. And I'm only stalling because I can't remember the name of there's a Johnny Cash track. Ring of Fire. Oh my God, it didn't want to come out. I do not have a really great, amazing, beautiful video about it. I only have dead links to what were once YouTube channels that were under my supervision but not ownership, where we had videos that were edited from a rehearsal and a live performance in a very small video, a very small venue, live performance venue, where we could not get the kind of recording I would ideally want, and that I can imagine in my mind, based on some of the larger venues with bigger audiences that we performed our show at. But in a show that I performed in a million and a half years ago, in another dimension, which may not exist in your dimension, honestly, you may try to find out about this and find nothing, depending on which universe or dimensional parallels, planetoid you're sitting in, listening to this. But in Clownzilla, a love story, and this is very real life. This is like real life. What's it? Memoir content that I do indeed weave into the fabric of the fictional backstory of the Incorrigible Mr Zeppo, using different names because I don't want to infringe on whatever remnants of intellectual property rights that may be beholden unto respect there. But I was once part of a seminal, in terms of postmodern clown theater history. Some astute historian will catalog this troupe and its productions. We were reviewed by the LA Times and I believe the New York Times and other papers here locally and a few internationally because of our performance at international theater festivals, specifically for physical performance. And I could go into a long tirade about that, and this is a media review about Star Wars' newest branch in the universe of different things. But I want to come full circle, right? I'm a theater artist by training and trade, and a creator by nature, and an enthusiast of storytelling. And I love storytelling in all its modalities. I love storytelling that's light and fluffy and airy and cotton candy-like and essentially meaningless, as long as it isn't effing toxic. I love storytelling that's deep and profound, dark and gritty, and even, into the areas of various levels of violent and grotesque. I once briefly flirted with a serious viewership relationship, fandom of the horror and the grotesquerie, in part inspired by my curiosity and fascination with the Guignon theater tradition. That's French. That's a woman's last name, Madame Guignon. There's a whole historical reference there, pin on the corkboard. Although I have some beautiful, delightful, talented friends that are much more hardcore enthusiasts of the horror genre in my social circle, some of which purely in the fan realm, living in places far away from Hollywood and La La Land, some of them working professionals. There's lines I don't want to reinvestigate of cinema, but I stand for the right of artists to create theater fantasy, film fantasy of every kind. Of the soft, glowy, warm, loving, affirming, hopeful, family-friendly, spiritual, and even religious kind. I don't have a problem with Christian film. I have a problem with the way Christian culture is diversifying and ever mutating and bifurcating and becoming a million different things, not limited to, and apparently not willing to call out about amongst itself, a gun cult. But that's a whole different issue in a whole different episode. Pin on the corkboard. Making media, making fantasy, making violent action entertainment products should not be criminalized, theoretically and practically, either legally or morally. It should not be hyper-vilified. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's a human nature problem. Have you met the human species? We're vile. Speaking from the heart as a creative artist, one of the, and it's easily dismissed as romantic garbage, but one of the deeper passion callings about being any kind of artist is to call upon reflection of the audience about the darkness that lives in us. Because it isn't a them problem, dude. I'm totally thinking of that brah meme with the whatever neoclassical painting with that person making that face. And just the word brah in a sort of scripty font faded into the painting. It's so gorgeous. And it's used for many things. It's a great template. I've recently stolen one of those to make it my own. I digress. And I try to steer back towards our actual theme for today. I don't like to think in reductionist, this is good, that is bad, let's fight kind of thinking, right? And that's at the core of most social conditioning. So check ourselves before we wreck ourselves, humanity. And let's step back and set aside the treadmill argumentation of those group of people over there are all vile and evil and corrupt, and my group over here is virtuous and true and righteous and divinely inspired. Because both of those statements are most of the time inherently deeply flawed, deeply inaccurate, and easily dismissed as bullshit malarkey lies designed to manipulate people. Having said all that, dear friends, let's also be vigilant and acknowledge the problematic issues in our politics, in our cultural paradigms, in our media-making, manufacturing industries, in all of our industries, our food industries, our war industries, our entertainment industries, blah, duh, obviously. And let us not fall into the tropes of arguingly mindlessly about it and not actually solving the real problems, not the imagined ones, not to fall into the trope of imaginary is fake. Imaginary is real in its own terms. Let's not manifest the horror show, Because one of the advanced mystical spiritual warnings about buying into garbage content is that, has it not occurred to you, to your friends who are adhering to this stuff and proselytizing about it and insisting that it's true and demanding that other people believe that it's true, has it not occurred to you, to your friends who are caught up in those rabbit holes, that maybe that's exactly what the system of oppression wants, to harness the power of your belief and make all movies evil and corrupt, whether or not they were created with evil and corrupt intentions, by making them in your mind that, then they become toxic whether or not you see them. The titles alone become these horrible things that invade your thinking, right? And the preposterous assumptions and projections made about them, and the people involved in creating them, etc. Conversely, let's not give any artist a blank check pass to be a toxic human being, right? It's about, as you may or may not have gathered yet, dear listener, depending on how much you've been paying attention, how many shows you've listened to in their entirety, and how many pins on the corkboard you've been tracking in your mind or literally with pen and paper. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, suggestion, someone please do that and then send me photos. There are good people doing good things. There are mediocre people doing mediocre things. There are bad apples doing bad apple-y things. And it is all an opportunity for us to reflect and turn inwards, whether we're being inspired by art or a problematic issue, about artists that becomes public discourse, or whatever in between phenomena between the two extremes. Let us take everything as an opportunity to contemplate things from a mindful point of view, taking the time to look inwards and ground ourselves in the mundane reality of things that are actually real, and in the spiritual reality of the things that we not just want to believe in, but are striving to phenomenologically confirm. Because blind faith belief in things that are toxically false is really, really bad, in my humble opinion. Okay, blah, da, blah, da, blah, 17 minutes of rambling foreplay, as one person critiqued it. Not recently, but some time ago. Let's find where we were. We already listened to part 0. Bye-bye, part 0. We already listened to part 2. Bye-bye, part 2. Now, let us play Media Review Obi-Wan, part 3. Brace yourselves. This is a 23-minute and 28-second long audio tape recording from last night. And I do believe that I jumped into this recording not more than 20 minutes into the episode. Let's see what I had to say. Okay, sorry. That was an accidental capture. No infringement is implied or intended. Don't sue me, lawyers. I don't even know if the audio I was concerned about captured enough to even be a legal concern or even be recognizable to human ears. I also had, I had to turn off my mic in order to hear it in the Sprecher app, so I heard even less than actually literally did get played. But I got enthusiastic about something, and a thought was developing, and it was clearly a transitional scene moment. I had the recording device closer to me, and a hand reached for the button, hit record, before the other hand found the mouse and clicked pause. So just to explain what happened there for anyone who didn't intuitively understand it just from what was said, I wish, and here's a little bit of a vision board manifestation talk. I love the idea and long for, and trying to align myself energetically into manifesting the possibility of being a job creator, having my own production studio, and being able to play you clips and have conversations with other people, staffers that are part of the show, hired for their intellect and sense of humor and vocal acting qualities and skills, so that our show is weird and wild and wacky and interesting, and we can do our own, parody fan fiction spoof plays about stuff. That's the kind of multifaceted, wacky, ridiculous show I'd like to have. and be able to offer you, dear audience and listeners. But not quite there yet. Just throwing that out there so you can help me envision it. And by thinking about it, by sharing it in that imaginarium of the mind space that we create together when you listen to the podcast, that we invoke, which is what is the name ZenCast, why we call it that, then hopefully that will help create the magnetism of manifestation necessary to attract all the necessary ingredients and phenomenological events and goings on necessary for that vision to become a reality. Hopefully, not 10 years from now, not 20 years from now, but as soon as magically possible, so that I can bring you only the ever increasing evolution of the vision into the highest form that the show could possibly be. Barring that, let's return to the tape and see what the F I had to say about Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi. So, okay, I have a couple thoughts. We are now on the timer track, whatever you call this thing, for episode 1, part 1. Season 1, episode 1, part 1. I'm at 6 minutes and 50 seconds in. But the reason that is, if I got to take back a couple of points deducted from my earlier thumbs up point awardment, because the sort of through line recap. Sorry, I had to pause and apologize to you, dear audience. I totally had a hiccup and a frog in my throat and the incorrect sensory, suspicion that I might need to hiccup, like hard and in a gross, like, oh God, now I can't talk for a few minutes kind of way. And thank God it didn't happen. But I didn't pause myself to apologize to you for the weirdness that was. And so I'm doing so now. All right, back to whatever I was saying. Of Ewan McGregor's journey during, his portrayal of Obi-Wan as an extra bit at the on the extras tab, as a sort of other thing to watch, either before or after you've watched the episodes, is exactly the same as the thing that you launch into when you press play on the episode. And I think that was a weak decision. I think that the two things should have been different, whatever they were. If we were going to watch the recap as it is, duplicated, but in singular form, I mean, if we're going to watch that recap as the thing at the very beginning, it should have been the actual opener to the show, with a little bit more pomp and circumstance, less than just a tip of the hat with the long time ago bit. It's not the scroller, but just the in a galaxy far, far away. It could have been a little fuller. It's perfect as a special bonus featurette thing that's 6 minutes long, that's separate and independent, and isn't just a chunk of the first episode crammed and just cut and set aside. Okay, so I would have preferred, if I was part of the creative team, which is always the place from which I bring my creative critique from. I don't just complain like a grouchy audience member. Because I'm a fan of these things that I'm speaking on. I'm not a hater. If I'd been in the room when creative decisions were being made, I would have said something. I would have made sure, however these decisions were made, that featurette was a featurette exclusive and in its own little thing over there on the extras tab, and that opening bit gave us something else that was again, for sure, a recap, but with a little bit more deeper respect. Like if it were bows in Japanese culture, this would be a pretty deep bow to the very first opening moment of the very first film that history ever saw, which was episode 3. Just to tie it all into a full circle, right? Because spoiler alert, Obi-Wan dies in episode 3 of the Star Wars film franchise in the very beginning, right? Like he doesn't make it past the first half of the first movie, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. If I'm totally wrong, whatever, don't hate me just for being as hardcore as other people might be about this movie. Excuse me. The second thing I thought was interesting and odd and weird and quirky that made me pause and reflect on the whole Star Wars universe, kind of, from a certain perspective. Well, and I have to explain. I have to clarify. I thought I was watching something else that just had some overlapping scenes when I pushed play on episode 1, part 1. Pausing here to interject and reiterate, I was really confused. And I'm rarely confused. Not because, I'm special or anything. I'm savvy about media. I'm savvy about movies. I'm savvy about storytelling. I'm an enthusiast. I love watching movies critically, analytically, not passively, not just consuming it mindlessly and agreeing, but like thinking about how it's structured, how it's told. And opening moments are really important to me. As a theater professional, as a practitioner, as an artist, someone who has written my own plays and produced and directed my own stagings of both my own plays and other people's plays, and participated in that process in every imaginable possible role you can conceive of within the realm of my skill set, right? Like, I spent a lot of time rehearsing, practicing, going through the process of bringing a production into fruition. And opening moments, and I've seen a lot of theater, right? Not as much as other people have, but in my own life, I've seen enough to know, small and amateur, big and professional, here and in other places. I've seen enough to know how to speak about it, I think, critically, analytically, and it's about its component parts and how they function, et cetera, et cetera. From a technical point of view, from an acting point of view, from a design point of view, etc. And opening moments. And I don't just mean the first scene when people start talking. That's not the opening moment. That's the next step after the opening moment. The opening moment in my mind now, and I will admit right here, plenty of theater enthusiasts, theater professionals, theater students may disagree with me. There's plenty of school of thought that just doesn't, that would not endorse or think this way. Okay, I'm aware of that, and I am an eccentric. I am a self-aware eccentric, a self-declared theater experimenter. From way back in the day when I started tinkering in theater to begin with. Okay, I believe creatively, artistically, specifically when it comes to theater, and there is an analogous, allegorically similar moment when it comes to film, but it's structured completely differently because of the way movies are in terms of the live experience with an audience in front of a screen. But you can, if you have experienced enough of both, you can make the compare and contrast translation without a lot of overly tedious explanation. In my humble opinion, the opening moment, the opening sequence, the tentpole moment that opens the theater's event, that marks the beginning of the show. That opening the theater's event is not the sentence I was setting out to say, but it's what came out. But opening the audience's Imaginarium mind, right? One could represent all of this with the iconic, almost stereotypical trope of the parting moment of opening the curtains, right? But it's much more than just that. There is a process, in my humble opinion, and one of the points of view I failed to critically list here, which is central to the understanding and the observations made in real life theater experiences, is that from the point of view of the audience, the audience. We were talking about in a previous moment recently about the narrative author fallacy, the author intentional fallacy, that no matter what the author intends, the audience brings their own baggage. Well, they also bring their own magic. The audience does, right? And it's most palpable in a theater. A savvy observer that comes to the theater with their subtle energies, people watching skill set and hat firmly in place, and I mean metaphorically, like your learning hat or your study hat or your philosophy hat or I'm talking about people watching, not to judge, not to criticize, not to comment on, not to make fun of, not to ridicule, not to mock, but to observe from a discernment, mindfulness point of view, with an emphasis on like nonverbal awareness of passive, subtle energies. There is a spiritual pomp and circumstance process of arriving to this ceremonial theatrical event, integrating with the growing group identity that is the phenomena of transitioning from being an individual, despite being a member of society as a collective whole, right? You feel really individual walking from the car to the ticket booth, from the ticket booth to your seat, whether you realize it or not, whether it's a part of the process you consciously observe or not, whether or not you have language for it yet or not. A savvy observer will note that there is a subtle, unspoken, unwritten sort of unconscious ritual process of arriving to the theater, enjoying, seeing others, being seen, chit-chatting, laughing exuberantly, participating in loud public talking, which sounds sort of meaningless at first, and then attenuating one's focus, attention, and energies. Get in your seat. Getting your butt in that seat. Shutting off that phone. Now, some people lag and some people are naughty about it, but some people enthusiastically anticipate, prepare, and are ready ahead of time. And everyone ultimately, consciously and unconsciously, brings their entire biomechanical, spiritual, energetic, intellectual process as ambulatory meat sack into this hyper-focused awareness of this performative ritual. And if the ritual is crafted with high level of skill, of a high order of magnitude, in my humble opinion, then every step along that way will be attended to creatively in some way or another. With the way the greeters greet you, the way the lobby sort of dresses up or gets, dressed up, in the style of holiday fringe and decoration, but vis-a-vis the theme or meaningfulness or iconic imagery of the show. The way in which entering the auditorium either hides the set away from you, leaving in some suspenseful mystery of wanting to know what will be revealed, or leaves it all there, beautifully lit, warmly glowing in that impossible luminosity that is the liminal magic of theater lighting in an auditorium where you can control environmental conditions such as visible light and auditory sound. The way in which an audio engineer chooses to craft a soundscape terrain with the pop cultural references and pop songs, or the custom originally composed music overtures or whatnot. The masters of this craft will gently and subconsciously guide and I'm even including the timing and placement of the pre-show announcements, right? The demeanor of the transition from gathering and being jovial and boisterous to a hushed and settled, attentive member of the collective phenomena we casually refer to as audience. Because it's way more than just sitting there together in a room. We can get lost. We can do a whole episode about some of the more subtle energy phenomena that can be phenomenologically experienced sitting in a theater whilst a large group of people is cohabitating, sharing that space in intimate proximity, and focusing their intention, their awareness, and consuming the depiction of imagined events. And although, of course, radically different, there are analogous tools and methodologies and tricks of the trade, examples and tropes about the same sort of thing, that same bringing to attenuation of the audience in film. And because film can be a very interestingly private event, a person can go to a movie theater and end up entirely by themselves, or surrounded by only a handful of other people, or be watching it on their mobile device in their car, or on the public transport, or at home in their home theater, etc. And because cinema still works and is emotionally evocative, regardless of that diversity, one-on-one theater is a little bit harder. I've literally performed, I've been on stage and poured my heart out to 3 or 4 people in a room. And I've been a compassionate, enduring, supportive audience member for a performance where actors are registering, realizing, and being devastated by the difference in energy in the room. A full house, 4 people. Not the same audience experience. Simultaneously for a person sitting there and the performers in front. But not necessarily the death toll of the art. But you know, I've literally attended living room theater performances where you know, the audience watching the show was outnumbered by the cast, and we were performing in a person's home with next to little to no theater technicality support, a little bit of sound effects, a little bit of, you know, incidental lighting, and it works, and it's transportive. It activates the Imaginarium of the mind. Why am I rambling about this? Because I'm about to critique the shit out of the opening moment of Episode 1, Part 1 of Star Wars' next-gen TV series, Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi. And I just wanted to speak in depth about my capacity to appreciate and create opening moments. I labored brutally on every project I've ever directed in the history of me directing other actors and performers and technicians in the process of creating a play. And it's I don't remember the number of plays I've directed, but it's more than a handful. And no, I never did that in a, you know, getting discovered, becoming successful kind of way. But the experimental laboratory of theater takes itself seriously enough, no matter what age level, what level of the education system it's participating in, because that's how you create art. And trust me, I know that it's hard, but one of the problems, fundamentally speaking, in either of the two mediums is that people do not take it seriously enough. And they think that getting the audience to the first sentences being spoken is what does it. And I beg to differ. And I've been complimented both by audience members and reviewers and critics from various places and levels of critique land specifically about the opening moments that I have crafted in my shows. I shouldn't use present tense because it's been forever, literally almost more than 2 decades now. No, that's not true. That can't be true. How long has it been since I don't want to think about it. So, let's get into it. Let's get back to it. I don't want to sound like a snob, okay? I am cosplaying, pretending to be a slightly snobbish sounding theater and television and film media critic. As if I had my own nationally televised, internationally syndicated broadcasted radio show that I do not have. But I do have my podcast that's distributed on the internet thanks to Sprecher.com and its affiliate program of various catching podcast apps. And it is indeed, dear audience, believe it or not, and some people refuse to believe it, listened to by more than a handful of people in 23 or 4 or 5 countries around the world, for which I am infinitely full of deep gratitude. And I hope you all find it entertaining enough to talk about it with your friends at the water cooler, which may be an outdated analogy for socializing at work. But here we go, friends, back into the dive, into the breach once more of whatever I was saying about Obi-Wan. I just know that I'm about to unleash a bit of essentially, bottom line, this, spoiler alert, I was less than satisfied with this particular bit of opening moment for this particular TV show. Just not impressed. And I've got things to say about it. And here we go. I didn't think I was going to watch the exact same 6 minutes I just watched as a separate extra widget. So there was totally a period of disorientation and what the fuck is going on? And I got up to change the episode because I thought I'd somehow managed to refresh the last thing I'd watched that I wasn't on the actual episode. Of course I was. So then I was like, huh. So that took all the air out of this epic, what for me, as a sort of amateur fan, I'm not even a pro fan, right? But as an enthusiast, I love the original films. I'm itching to watch them all again. I was hoping for a moment that pulls us in with nostalgia and wows us with something new. And that opportunity was totally missed, in my humble opinion. Although this recap thing was interesting, like I've said. Shoulda, coulda, woulda, might as well have stayed a separate thing. And this opening 6-7 minutes could have built to a really beautiful, epic opening credits sequence that somehow built and extrapolates from the original visuals and sequence and gives us something really interesting, dynamically new. That's the opportunity. The gold mine of any franchise that survives this long and proceeds to reinvent itself is to not only honor its past and its origins, but to playfully reinvent them in ways that are not too terribly cliche. I read somewhere recently about a Ghost in the Shell title, which is called Ghost in the Shell, the new movie, quite almost facetiously, I think, which is a relatively older movie in the series of movies and anime TV shows, which are all interconnected, some of which apparently are designated different universes from each other, but all of whom share a similar enough through line to be considered one cohesive brand package. Someone was critiquing the new movie, and I think they weren't even touching the subtitle except to just call it, just identify the awkwardness, the cringiness of it, that it's just bluntly called the new movie. But they went on to say something about how this movie had too many examples of the wrong way to homage and call back and reference a prior property in the same world or the same collection or the same series. And I understand that pitfall. And I think this is a different kind of example of just a failure to really capitalize on it. Sometimes, and I felt this way throughout in different things of different Star Wars stuff. For example, The Mandalorian felt the most un-Star Warsy and the most alien. It felt like some other intellectual property had stumbled into the Star Wars backlot and was it's part of Star Wars, but it's also this other thing. We'll just doesn't matter. Go. And I know it's not. It was just such a weird, interesting expansion into a really minor, nuancey, detail-y bit. Because let's be really, really honest. And it was such a weird, counterintuitive take, too. Because what's his name? The guy in the green. The guy whose show came out after
I was failing to remember the name.
Now.
Boba Fett.
Isn't the Mandalorian, right?
While
He just has
name
Mandalorian
not found,
armor.
happens
so I was
to me
so
a lot.
confused. He doesn't follow the way.
It has to do with the fact
so
that
what is the way?
in different universes, the same person
it
and
felt
or character
really, for Star Wars, it felt
varying
really
different names based
and,
on the same name, but slightly weirdly different.
I hope.
So, like,
I have
to do a cheesy example,
that Obi-Wan will really bring it home.
He always corrects
because
for
it's
this when he
anchored
talks
in a
about it
character
from
that
the
literally
centerline
lived
perspective. And if you
the
don't know what that
original
means,
movies,
there's an episode
and was
I
then
just recently
expanded
did where I talk
upon
about
in the
Centerline.
prequels,
It's one of the
the
Bad Wednesdays
post-prequel
episodes.
prequels.
Centerline in a fractal universe is the most you at the center of all the different variant universes.
A sequel, not a
post-sequel.
post-sequel.
Most
if a prequel and a sequel, what do you call the original thing besides the original?
But like, Mr. Zeppo has encountered Mr. Zippos, Mr. Zarpos, Mr. Zingos. It just starts to vary away because the way fractal universal variants and variation
maybe
works
they'll build up some of that.
Sometimes that creates
sure
aberrations that you don't expect.
Who just sort of blanket
I
and
digress.
aren't looking at this from a place of like how would you do it differently, which is totally what I look at every meet.
What was the name of the character that I
how would I
remember?
have done this?
It doesn't matter.
I
already said his name.
If I've been in a position of
decision making, and now you know that I can remember the guy's name, I just couldn't. Had a voice and apparently can't now again.
What would be different?
But back to tape.
Not to say that my opinions are inherently better or that I'm, something that I'm not.
Did I totally just like talk through myself talking? I thought I had paused it. And I apologize if I just did that and it was all a gobbledygooky mess that you couldn't understand. And I'll try really diligently to avoid doing that in the future. Sincerest apologies. But there again, more evidence that this is really just me. And this is a real, raw, and radically unscripted show. Someday I would love to have staff and create my own scripts and assign people to generate pieces for me and blah, 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 blah. The way most talk shows work. A combination of David Letterman and John Oliver is sort of where I'm targeting, although I'm not British. But I digress. Let's go back to the tape and hopefully be able to hear it all clearly without me rambling through it, saying stuff from here on out.
But just because of my training, because I studied entertainment arts, etc. We'll see what happens. The weird thing that made me chuckle was that we got all of that, and then we get this. We get dropped into without pomp and circumstance, without opening credits yet. We had the redundancy that happened, which was nostalgic in and of itself, but had all the flaws that I just cataloged for you. We get dumped into this serene moment where it kind of feels like, oh, maybe we'll get a look into the backstory of Obi-Wan. And that question is not answered. Are we in the moment that I am now? I still don't know what we're receiving, right? And this is a couple of beats after this opening serenity. And there's people, arguably Jedis, presumably, doing some kind of Tai Chi kind of, gentle karate exercise movements. And that gets interrupted by stormtroopers and laser beams. And
also, I thought I'd pause and actually pause it this time and drop in that that question is never answered satisfactorily to my taste. Although, yes, there's a lot of backstory implicit in this whole first episode because of the nature of the relationship that's going to be explored in the show. When I was saying backstory, I was like, do we get to see Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi as a child? Like, do we get a whole child backstory of Obi-Wan? Which was one of the things I thought might be going on in this show, which might be a bit too much to ask at this point. Okay, let us correctly return to tape and not mess that up. That was a colossal technical failure, and I really, really apologize for that now. Again, I'm sorry that I talked through myself, over myself, overlapping like that just then. And I hope you'll forgive me, and I hope you'll continue to enjoy the rest of everything I had to say. Here we go.
Then what is like suddenly a very immersive come with me if you want to live sort of escape sequence with tragedy built in at the end, and kids that were way too calm throughout and were way too dull in their emotional response to their Padawan, presumably their master, I guess, being shot down and killed. But also it was supposed to be quick because they run away. And then here's the part, and that's not the part that was funny giggly to me. This is the part that was funny giggly to me. We get a blackout and a drop shot, a drop transition from the sky into the horizon of some planet that makes you think of Tatooine, but might not be Tatooine. I think I saw some grass and some greenery, so it isn't Tatooine. But I also don't remember now, and I'm not going to rewind at this moment. We don't get a name. But we get a little tiny, I almost could have missed it if I was busy looking at some other quadrant of the screen on a big enough screen. It's small enough font. It says 10 years later. And this is what made me giggle about that. I don't know of, and I'm sure the hardcore nerds will correct me with a very severe and judgmental push of very real or imaginary glasses up the bridge of the nose, that there is. But I don't recall ever being explained directly any kind of date and time system in the Star Wars cinematic universe, right? If we're going to borrow that from Marvel, that designation. I don't know from other properties. Like, there's plenty of comic books now. Marvel is running a Star Wars comic book. There has been comic books from various publishers, I think, in the past. There's been novelizations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's video games. I don't know if in the plethora of property content, if there's been a designation of a star date that somehow gives us a system that and maybe I'm being stupid and it's staring me in the face. I know that there's Death Star, before the Death Star, after the Death Star, the second Death Star, but those are all contained and confined to the original 3 films. So the timeline of the 3 films, I'm very familiar with. The rest of the expanding universe, as we have spiraled in and out of different time zones, I'm kind of lost. And on some of them, I really got it like, what was it? There was one, I forget which one it's called, but the one that ends with we see young Princess Leia, I was like, what? Wait, what? Did we just time travel? Or have I been seeing this whole thing as an after Leia passes away, like after Leia is no longer around? Anyways. And I don't even remember when or if she passes away. I just know that the actress has passed away. May she rest in peace. And which is who I meant to say. But I digress. So 10 years later, it doesn't tell us a lot here in this moment when we've just recapped all of everything that happened in the prequels, the post-prequel, the post-quel prequels, the prequels that came out of the original films but were set before them. And because, that's how it be sometimes. And then we have this, there was no date set to this invasion. There was no associated link. There was no general listed. There was no designation to what this is associated. There was just stormtroopers and blue and green lightsaber people trying to not die. And impossibly deflecting almost every single shot fired at them. Which is always the funnest, funniest, weirdest, craziest thing about Star Wars. And you ever notice that Star Wars laser beam machine guns shoot really, really slow? And are wildly inaccurate? But that's a whole nother thing. I digress.
So, about that opening scene, right? The kids doing Tai Chi and suddenly stormtroopers arrive. If that's meant to specifically be associated or invoke or anchor that moment that we're watching the 10 years before we get to the opening scene, the proper opening scene of here we are present tense now in the show. If that's supposed to be set in a concrete canon moment that we already know all about, that I just am not getting the reference, I feel dumb, but I also think they did not try very hard. And maybe I'm just not seeing it because it's from one of the side movies or the animated featurettes or the animated shows that I don't know about or whatever it might have been. But if it's in one of the primary films, this battle, I didn't get enough of a narrative guideline or guide rail to be like, aha, that's the invasion of Malkypork. I'm not enough Star Wars nerd to know names of planets beyond Tatooine. I'll be really honest with you. But like, you know, like I don't know what that is. Does that happen? When does that happen? What planet are we on when that invasion happens? Who are they chasing? Is Samuel L. Jackson in the room and we just don't get to see him because budgets or because they just didn't want to bother CGIing him from one of the other movies and putting him in the shot? Like what, where, when, you know, what are we here in this moment? And we don't get that, which is dissatisfactory. And doesn't help contextualize the trauma and the tragedy of this particular. Is she a Jedi Master? Are those all her Padawans? Like literally her apprentices? Aren't they only supposed to be able to have one at a time? Literally, we get a flashback somewhere else where Yoda admonishes what's his nuts? Ewan McGregor's dad. Oh no, not Ewan McGregor's dad. That's incorrect. What is the guy that's not Obi-Wan, that's older than Obi-Wan's name? Qui-Gon Jinn, which never made any sense to me. I'm like, what? It makes me think of like some sort of American aftermarket fake Japanese cocktail in a bottle, in a can. Always didn't. I was just like, and I didn't get it, but also I get it. I totally get it. It's Star Wars, being quirky Star Wars, being diversity Star Wars in and of itself. Because like Star Trek, Star Wars was pro-diversity fundamentally in its construction of its universe. There was people of all kinds of actual human races on set in the film and in the depiction of it. And there were imaginary races of all kinds living amongst each other, not living in segregated, classist, tyrannical, blah, 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 oppressive societies, because the Empire was all of that, without necessarily being black versus white versus black racism. It was definitely some sort of like, this group are the superior group around all the nationalist tyranny should be focused, constructed around. It's our will, whoever we fuckers are, behind the Empire. The Sith Lords, whatever they represent. Are they a race? Are they a credo? Are they a brotherhood / sisterhood too? What are they? Are they a religious sect? Are they what else could we call the Empire? That's like, ooh. And while we're at that, before we get too sidetracked, one of the things that culturally I've been a little like, ugh, I don't know how I feel about that. Like free will, and I get it, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, it's all a movie. Because I am that guy. I'm like, let's not overthink this, please, and get too freaky about it, because it is just a fucking movie. Pardon the F-bomb. Don't censor me. But there has increasingly, in recent years, especially in the self-identification culture of bumper sticker labels, been this increasing fetishization of the dark side, right? And like this romanticization of being one of the stormtroopers, or being, on the side of the evil agenda to take over everywhere where free people just live freely and oppress them through the technocratic tyranny of all the horrible things that the evil dark empire of using the dark forces inherent in the magical universe that's alive, mind you. I mean, it's the only implication you can draw from midichlorians being the source of the source of the force. Sorry for the half spoonerism there. Being the force of the source. There's the full spoonerism. If midichlorians, a living thing that lives inside you, that's separate from you but part of your body too, is what gives you the ability to channel, access, and engage with the magical forces of the Force, then the whole effing universe must be alive, because that's a living force being shared with you by another living thing that is cosmological in its constitution and origin. But maybe I'm taking things too far. I digress. What were we tangenting about just now that we had to pause the tape? I don't even remember, but that's the way this show rolls, folks. Welcome to it. It's 10:40 a.m. on a Saturday morning, May 28th, 1999. And we're talking about Star Trek. No, I'm kidding. 2023. And we're talking about Star Wars, the reboot. No, I'm kidding. It's 2022. But I will play with that as a trope in my literature. Get how it works? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. See what I'm doing? Maybe not. Maybe after a few episodes. Let me know. Drop me a tweet or whatever the kids are doing. I can't do TikTok. I can do YouTube reels of TikTok reviews and mashups and compilations, but I can't do actual TikTok. So don't drop me a TikTok, is all I'm saying. If you're going to drop me a TikTok, it better be part of some collective review, whatever you call them, you know. Okay. Reeling it back in, folks. Reeling it back in. Reeling it back in. Star Wars. The dark side. The postmodern American pop cultural fetishization. And one of the most alarming things I've ever seen that's like, and I'm not what the opposition wants you to maybe think I am, right? I'm not what the haters project on me. And by that I mean, I'm not anti-gun. I'm not a gun hater. I just don't think we need actual war machine level popularization as a consumer product, as a disposable consumer product model that is intrinsically and inherently and nefariously, I would argue, although I'm not pointing fingers at anyone in particular, intertwined with patriotism, toxic patriotism as a self-identity, and toxic masculinity as a self-identity. So it's redundant, and it doubles down on its negative indoctrination of like, your only tool is a gun. All your problems are targets. Go solve your problems. Like, that's really gross, you guys. And, you know, I got to speak out against it whenever it comes up. I also distract myself from whatever train of thought I was having about Star Wars. But we will come full circle and get back to the tape in just a hot second. To try to connect threads, right? Like, fantasy violence is not a crime. Real gun violence is. And I cannot stand by and idly tolerate what seems to me multiple decades worth of generational indoctrination into the normalization of that. And yes, some media properties are obviously indulgently, carelessly, violently, glorificationally gross enough to be part of that. But not everything is. And yes, there is video game, entertainment content that's literally like an e-sport of team deathmatch. And that isn't youth appropriate and should be a 21 and over age restricted modality of gaming, which I would totally have supported before I was 21, the way I supported not drinking until I was 21, right? There's things that are okay as an adult that are not okay as children. And there is the sort of the experimental entertainment tradition of bridging those two stations in life. If I may make a cross-reference here, this is an entertainment media review show, right? And I am a variety entertainment host. At least in my mind, I am. I'm stalling because I can't remember the name of the movie. Error, title of movie not found. I saw this at the Hollywood Bowl. Not live, but in concert. I think it was in concert. I can't remember if it was actually in concert or not. What is it called?
It's one where, the guy's the pirate and he's trying to save his girlfriend, but she thinks he's a terrible pirate. And then he's like trying to set it straight between them, but she still doesn't understand. So she pushes him and he tumbles down the thing. And the dread pirate Robert says to the beautiful blonde-haired lady, "As you wish." Like that story. What the hell is the name of that effing movie and book? The movie came first in that one, in a delightful reversal of the traditional way of things in the entertainment industries. That movie came first. The Golden Book of Sorrow is not its title. Not in this universe that I'm sitting in now. At least it wasn't when I woke up yesterday. Did I wake up in a universe where that's the name of the book? The name of that book is... I'm so fixated on derailing my entire Star Wars Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi critical review show to finish a thought. It's not Jamba Juice. It's not Jumanji. It's... What's it called? And I'm not doing this just for comedy. This is real. Like, this is the way my brain actually works. Error file not found. But I can totally see Columbo, a.k.a. Peter Falk, which are usually the names and things that I can't remember, reading from the book. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. As you wish. Grandkids sitting in bed. Ugh, are they going to kiss? You can skip the munchy stuff. Well, as you wish. That was not a very good Peter Falk impression, nor a Columbo impression. But yes, as a kid, probably a little age inappropriately, borderline, but everything was sanitized just enough back then that it maybe was okay. Used to watch Columbo in the afternoon in syndication and got into police procedural comedies. That's why I like The Pink Panther, which is arguably no longer, to be considered in and of itself cutting-edge film comedy. But you can't take away from the artiste mind at the center of that series, that film series, The Pink Panther. You can't take away from Peter Sellers. Okay? But reeling it back, what the hell? The Golden Barnacle. No! The Fantasy Bridegroom. No! Brain work. Universe, stop derailing me. You all know what I'm talking about. That is a brilliant coming-of-age story that's arguably, in the broad spectrum brush, sci-fi, fantasy, adventure. Mostly fantasy, not so much sci-fi. But he does have his own water wheel cogworks death machine, so sci-fi, because he is sort of literally the evil empire overlord trying to take over the world with the help of, nefarious henchmen, brutal murderers, corrupt police officers and enforcers, and a wizard in a dungeon with a cogwheel water machine, wheelworks machine that magically sucks the life out of you. So, what's my point? There's content that does that really, really well, and arguably that is one of those shining examples. The Summer Brew Witch. What the fuck is the name of that movie? It's killing me now. If I were watching this, I'd be maybe already done laughing out loud and kind of exhausted by it already. But, The Princess Bride! Oh my god. I was going to have an aneurysm or something there. If I fall over dead after this podcast episode, I apologize, and may my legacy of this podcast go trend hotwire through the world and help inspire some radical inward change, because that's the point. That's the objective. Now, I don't want to self-aggrandize here. I'm not a guru. I'm not an enlightened one. But enlightenment, I think, arguably, is your funky talking monkey's birthright. And because you're too busy flinging poo at each other and jerking off, you're not getting there. And if you all stop flinging poo, trying to murder each other and jerk off so much, and jerking off is not inherently bad, right? Flinging poo at each other arguably is, because there's just no good turnout there. There's no good results. But let's not get derailed. Welcome to the show, folks. Welcome to the inner spiral, intertangled, coggy workings of my mind. Inner cog, whatever I was trying to say there. Reeling it back. Wishing I could take a musical break, but totally can't, because if I push play on something else, I'll lose my spot at
8 minutes and 42 seconds into however long this whole thing is, because this is me live, in case anyone lost track. This is not the recording from last night's viewing of the entertainment title in question. I think I said everything I had to say about Princess Bride and whatever purpose it served bringing it up. There's age-appropriate movies, and then there's age-inappropriate movies. But movies are movies. And to close, just like with free speech, obviously inherent part and parcel with the free speech argument, I defend the artist's free speech right, but I also defend the notion that there is the audience's right to draw some sort of boundary and some sort of guidance for itself and other members of its community, right? Those two things are not mutually exclusive. The artist has the free speech right to create whatever freaking drivel and commit it to celluloid that they want. The audience has every right to create a guidance system that monitors for particular kinds of content and lets people know, hey, this stuff is riddled with this shit you may not want to watch. They have the right to do it, but you don't have to watch it. And we, the media critics, get to do it for you, and hopefully, with integrity and intellectual honesty and not a bunch of corrupt baloney and malarkey, tell you about it so that you can make a well-informed self-consent choice for yourself. Because there's power in it. There's art. If it's striving to be art, even if it's failing to be art, if I may be so bold. Because there's garbage out there that's influencing people that dresses up and pretends to be art. There's garbage out there that's influencing people, full stop. Because content, at whatever level, whatever category or bucket you want to define it as, can have that power over your mind. If, big capital, all caps, if you choose to let it. In channeling my inner George Carlin here. But it doesn't have to be. And we don't have to hyperfixate it and hypervilify all of it. It can just be meaningless fluff. It can just be Star Wars. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar and not anything else to badly misappropriate some sort of quote attributed to Freud, I believe. Sometimes, and to take it to an extreme that's very real and very weirdly, I've seen being referenced directly in a trending meme that I don't understand the point of, right? Which is snuff film. There's an old school snuff film that for many is sort of buried in history past. And if you don't know what a snuff film is, bless your heart, don't find out. Do not go search that shit. I will act as the cultural, intellectually honest transparency filter of consensual awareness before you allow content into your own self. A snuff film is the pinnacle of graphic violence committed to film. To the best of my understanding, it's either banned or so taboo that no one commercially produces it. There's been films that have been rumored to potentially have crossed that threshold. Although I reference this meme that's now currently trending and that I worry may be tied to a lot of the malarkey side of content in meme world and not any kind of genuine, meaningful, authentic self-expression kind of meme. And that, the reason it's trending may be very well a toxic, not so good reason. I'm not going to name the particular historical bit of snuff film reference because, I don't want to party to that. Right? And I condemn, I rarely do this about media. I'm not a teetotaler about media. Like I just finished saying, I defend the right for the artist to have free speech. There are bounds. There are limits. There are creative, moral integrity issues where it's like, well, that is too far and should not be allowed and shouldn't be argued for by any rational artist that's truly trying to make art and not commit crimes and just happen to document them, okay? And snuff film is literally up there, as well as a whole other category of grotesqueries that we don't need to invoke now. But I do feel the need to make declarative statements about, because I ended up here sort of in a weird way. So there's that to balance out. The existence of extreme content does not, in and of itself, prove that Hollywood industry as a totalitarian, monolithic whole is all the horrible things that any other content is peddling or suggesting or accusing it of being, trying to convince others of believing it might be. Because having said all the things I've already said about it and the human species, despite being an industry, it's a very disparate affair. It's a group of people over there doing something and a group of people way the F over there doing something, and neither the twain shall hardly ever meet, except for, in background character actor, crossover instances, and in, long-term crossover of people working in similar technical positions and whatnot. It's not like Hollywood hangs out regularly in terms of how films are made, But I digress. I've said enough, and I've made my disclaimer. The garbage content out there, making absurd, patently false, paranoia-inducing, riddled with neurolinguistic, manipulative, clauses and techniques in it, may make the occasional valid point, because there is corruption and there's problems, but will not ever convince me to thus hate the industry, hate the entire catalog of cinematic product ever made, or hate everyone as a whole, hate all the people involved. I just won't. I refuse, and I refuse to stop enjoying it and commenting about it and critiquing it. Will I die on this hill? No. Will I choose to die on any hill? Probably not. I'm more of a realist and a survive to fight another deist. But that's a whole nother episode for a whole nother day, for a whole nother set of issues we can discuss. Having rambled enough at you now during this interjection, let us get back to the recording.
So I still don't know. Is Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi going to be a child in this next sequence of events that I'm about to watch unfold in front of me? Was he one of the kids that ran away? Was he one of the kids that was doing Tai Chi and then got lasered down and had to escape without their parental superior, guidance teacher, whatever that was? I don't know. Is Obi-Wan an older but not yet quite the old guy living on in the desert in Tatooine? When is this? Don't know. And yeah. If we're gonna I know there's more shows and new movies coming out. This show coulda, shoulda, woulda opened with something that honors the full circle transcendent role that Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi is playing in the next generation of storytelling. Because surely this show is going to launch other characters' shows and have spin-offs, etc., and be the setting or the backstop, the springboard to other properties. Shoulda, coulda, woulda had a really awesome homage. They nailed it, knocked it out of the park. Opening sequence that builds to, that doesn't start with the title credits, but builds to that opening credits before the movie, kind of a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away with the scrolly bits, and did it in perfect homage to the old ones, but with something awesome, flary, and new that just knocks it out of the park and defines the redefining for the next generation. Because none of the other properties hitherto have quite done that yet. And if you're going to do it with any of it, if you're going to do them with any of them, if I'd been there in the earliest days of development, as all of these projects were unfolding since whenever you want to go back to the prequels themselves, let's say. But from whenever this became a Disney thing, I would have been like, for Obi-Wan, we really got to nail the backstory and honor and homage the performance and the scenes from the original episodes 3, 4, and 5, and that Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi, and not just sort of gloss over him, and give this a grand, and I don't know why I keep thinking of the lion roar in the company logo for MGM movies, and Star Wars wasn't an MGM movie, I don't think, but something that evokes that level of grandiosity and beauty, because that was the gold seal of like, whoa, this is going to be an epic kind of thing. Because I don't know why. It's a random association. It's probably irrational, but I love that lion. And when they did it right, it was a great attenuation tentpole moment. And borrowing from theater, openings need that ingredient. They need a ba-dum. That was just a random noise-making sound effect to represent that moment when, like, the gongs are played and whatever was happening in the lobby and in the chairs and the hubbub in the audience before is now hush. And we know it's all about to start, right? Because in a way, you can consider this the new episode 0 of the movies, of the whole franchise. I know that there's at least one other movie, the one that trips me out, that leads to the end of the movie finding a very young Princess Leia that then records the message that reaches Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi. But this is presumably, based on how young he looks, from a much earlier period. Unless they're just like planning on replacing the old actor of Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi with some sort of aged version of Ewan McGregor, which would be one of those choices up there. I would put right up there with like creating characters like Floppy Ears, what's his face, and trying to create a CGI Jabba the Hutt and putting him in scenes where it would not look right. It did not look good. The very first CGI Jabba the Hutt, I'm not talking about from the TV show, I'm talking about from when they crammed it into the re-release of the original OG movies before we even thought there was a glimmer of hope there would be sequels or prequels. And they came out with these like 10-year anniversary, whatever the frick anniversary it was, and in a bonus scene, which if you bought the right DVD or Blu-ray or whatever it was put in the middle of the movie. There's this Han Solo scene that was like they had filmed a test sequence of it with like some sort of Shakespearean-y costumed actor guy being Jabba the Hutt. And because there was no context around it, there was some discussion. I don't know if this is fan theory or if this was just speculative, like from the historian's perspective, but there was some discussion that maybe Jabba the Hutt looked normal and then something happened to him and became this globulous glob. Obviously now we understand that they are a race, and it is Jabba, the race of Hutt, or the family of Hutt, and they always look like that. So this was just like a mock-up scene, probably, that they did with the intention to fill it in or compost it with animatronics or something, and then it never got used. But in revisiting it, oh god, they slapped in this. It looks like a previs done by like a young college junior, this horrible CGI Jabba the Hutt. And they tried to put it in, and this is after Jurassic Park had come out, I do believe. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was before Jurassic Park had come out. Like, it wasn't ready. Whatever they were doing, it should have been a bonus feature that wasn't trying to smashed right dab in the middle of the movie. And there was some other scene where they did the same thing. It was just bad. It was just so bad. So, there you go, friends. I still love Star Wars. Don't get me wrong. I love Star Wars. I'm not like my friend Chris from high school, who could, back in the day.
Okay, wait. Before I let the tape launch into that whole story, shout out to my old friend Chris from high school. We'll get into that. Oh, now I just forgot whatever it is I was going to interject and talk about. I very rarely hate things, right? I shared that meme. It's part of my curated collection of political memes. I refuse to hate, and it's got a list of all the people that hate each other in American politics. I just do. I refuse to hate Republicans. I refuse to hate Democrats. I refuse to hate these people, those people. This. I just refuse to hate. I don't want to hate it. I don't want to hate things. I don't want to hate on people. I don't want to hate on stuff. I loathed this embarrassment that was the very first attempt at making a CGI Jabba the Hutt. Why? And I just wanted to contextualize this. From day one of me being a self-aware movie enthusiast, whenever that began, from when I was one of the first horror movie I ever watched was Poltergeist. I was totally too young in an age-inappropriate kind of way to be watching it. I'm sure plenty of people watched it. I was with my parents. We had gone to some couple's house, some friend of the family's household, and had dinner with them and had sat around and then watched a movie with them afterwards. And some pause was taken. I was asked if I felt up for watching a horror movie. I think I may have voted enthusiastically, yes. I was already into movies, right? I already liked movies. I'd seen perhaps some sanitized for regular TV watching horror type movies. I'd seen some hokey pokey, black and white horror stuff that was in hyper syndication. Oh, the glory days of hyper syndication. You young kids wouldn't understand that. You post-streaming era youngins wouldn't understand the weird, interesting, curious joy. I thought. Some people hated this. But they were just closed-minded poo-poo heads that didn't understand that old TV was just as good as new TV if you just fucking took it for what it was. But back in the day when there was 13 channels on your TV knob set, there was no remote control. There was a freaking knob dial. You had to walk up to the television set to manually turn. Yes, that's click with your hands manually by rotating. There was this era when there was only X many channels. Now, there were 13 channels on the knob. There were not 13 channels on the air. Some of those knobs were just static. One, like 0 or 1, right? Sometimes you had some manufacturers put more than 13 channels because they didn't like 13. The one I owned, I think, either had 13 or 14. I just remember 13 being like spooky and prominent and there. And a channel that from the earliest days was boring and not very interesting, and then slowly became more interesting and became sort of like the ethno-American, like the dark, Black American main sort of news channel, at least in my region. Maybe not so much anymore. But I digress. In that era, in that golden era of television, and I don't mean the 50s. I'm not that old, for fuck's sake. I mean, like, for anyone old enough to remember the effing 80s. Right? Like, that's not that long ago, folks. I mean, we're talking about Star Wars. We're talking about movies. Episodes 1, 2, and 3. Episode 3 came out in 1979. No, I'm wrong. That's a memory error foul. 1978 or 77. I don't have it in front of me. Don't judge me. I'm not a meticulous facts and figure. I do horrible at pub quiz trivia challenges. I'm not that guy. I'm about big picture patterns and emotional vibes and emotional processing and how did anyways, I'm about other things than just the little minutia and memorizing facts and figures and things that would win you a trivia challenge. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not judging the trivia challenge, people. Okay? I digress. I lost my train of thought. There's probably several dangly threads laying about here in the last interjection, but I've interjected enough too many times. Let's wrap up this bit of tape. We've got just so little left. Let us proceed all the way through to the end, friends, without further interruption. Here we go.
And this is back when we were in high school, mind you, okay? I went to high school before most of you were born, but after the Star Wars movies came out. And he owned VHS copies of these. I'm sure when DVDs came out, he owned DVDs, but he owned VHS copies of these, and he watched them obsessive compulsively, and he could report to you. He could, at the drop of a hat, he could answer to you almost any nonsensical trivia if there was a real answer available that you could see visually on screen. How many shots fired in which and what scene? He knew the answer. How many times did so-and-so drop their gun? He knew the answer. I'm making up random Stubo questions, like dumb questions that don't exist, but we used to play this game with him about, like, because back then I was much more conversant in the films. There wasn't 40 other films to keep in my head from the same title series. There were just 3, and I had seen them a fair bit, but this guy blew me out of the water with the level of detail. And not only did he know, and he's out there. I believe he and I and some of his family, like some sisters and whatnot, some of the people that we, crossed paths with in high school are still all friends on Facebook. But Facebook did not exist, dear friends, when I was in high school. Just for clarity. I'm that old. But it was just astounding. And I don't know if he's listening to the show ever, but if he does and he catches this episode, much love to you, Chris F. I try to keep it anonymous here because it's not about the individuals, it's about the ideas and the discussion about them. So here we go, friends. I'm going to take a break, and I'll see you when I fire up the old recording machine to rant and rave about whenever I pause next.
I thought I spoke. Clearly, I was wrong here in this thinking about myself and what may or may not have been captured on that audio tape. I thought I spoke a little bit more eloquently and hilariously about my good friend Chris, who was truly, like, the number one Star Wars nerd of my peer group and of probably that generation of that class, that high school. It was impressive. It was impressive. And his dedication to watching it, like, he would talk about, like, being excited for watching it again next weekend after a rehearsal from a play. I'm coming home after rehearsal and watching these movies again. And I was just like, I was astounded. I was beyond impressed. I admired that capacity in him as I have admired that ability in others, whether about Star Wars or anything else. Even when it's about sports ball, which in and of itself, I'm not inspired by the sports ball part, but the capacity. People who can like dish out to you detailed statistical facts and like historical anecdotes and analysis about sports ball, in great granular detail. Kudos to you. I don't have the patience. That would take a lot of uncomfortable effort on my part to achieve, right? And even with things that I love. I know a few cool, interesting, fun facts about theater that your average, everyday theater professional that studied theater at school doesn't have ready at the tip of their tongue and will be like, what? And kind of, I could capitalize at any time in awkward social situations to make myself look way more cultured than them and make them, potentially question their own knowledge about theater. But I don't know a bunch of, they could probably also, in the same event or the same conversation or obviously through any process of working together, come to call me out for my absolute lack of obsessive compulsive catalog of knowledge about theater at all. I'm not that kind of guy. But boy, do I love asking theater nerds their thoughts on the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen and getting crickets, right? And getting the chance to push my own imaginary theater nerd glasses up the bridge of my nose as I just played out physically for the funsies of. But I digress. I'm the same sort of not nerdy enough about film, right? Like, I will literally come on the air and talk about a show and not be able to tell you the name of the cast and starring actors. Not because I don't care, not because I'm an ignoramus or a moron, but because my brain is just literally not good. I have 150, 65 something IQ. And I once, in a very smug, very self-aggrandizing chapter of my life, wrote a tiny little FU love note to all the haters who choose to insist in calling me names, including stupid, ignorant, and uneducated, etc. Because there's a few things that I'm not. There's plenty of things. There's plenty of flaws. I'm a flawed living robot from another dimension sent here to warn you about your own flaws, people. AKA, I'm a flawed human individual that's trying to make art about a robot from another dimension, etc., etc. And not to pretend to be on top of my own flaws in some sort of like, look at me, I got my shit together kind of way. I don't know. I still struggle to quit smoking cigarettes, for F's sake. I don't lord anything over anybody. I don't think. But I do have opinions, and I do have a sense of humor, and I do have a big rock salt of snark. And I think that's fair play, as long as you're not actually trying to maliciously, ruin people emotionally, intellectually, or career-wise, or violate their safety, their integrity, their well-being, and their health. I'm a sane, rhetorical questioner of our pop culture. I think maybe people might disagree with that assessment. But I'm really, really glad you've jumped on board and are here along with me for the ride. My thinking is now that I've, as I rarely on occasion do, stretch this out, not on purpose for the sea taffy gimmick of artificially stretching it out, but because I really enthusiastically have had a lot to say as we listen to the audio tapes of my thing. And the next and final recording is literally 45 minutes and 54 seconds long. So if I interrupt even the littlest bit to clarify, to add a thought, to make a joke, to expand on anything, it will quickly escalate to about an hour's length of time, as that or more, as have the first and now second episodes or parts of this mini-series special episode look at Obi-Wan. So indulge me in hanging on a little further. If you've made it this far, folks, trust me, the final tape is worth it because I really get into it. And I think there's a few bits that you'll find interesting and worth talking about. And honestly, I think I point out a few things that generally, I think the mainstream media review critics probably would fail to point out. One of the reasons I have aspirational, vague ambitions of being a critic, a sort of critic at large, is that I think a lot of the professional, tight suit, stick up their butt, art critics really nitpick and sometimes project and make up things to critique and miss a lot of the real, the obvious shit that's there to talk about, and go for like highfalutin things that are just, I don't know. But I bet anybody, any Johnny-come-lately could roll up on me and say that about me as if I were some industry hag, which I'm not. I'm really just me sitting here in my pajama and my magic robe, and I'm not kidding. I'm in my cowboy boots. I shit you not, dear friends and audience. Radically real, raw, and unscripted. I am wearing socks, cowboy boots, pajama pants, undershirt, A-line undershirt. I used to love calling it wife beater until my foolish, childish mind at the age of like 12 realized what that actually meant and what it all implied. And went, oh, gross. That's dumb. Why are these... Why? Why is it cool? But I digress. And my blue magic robe. I have 2 magical robes, which are my house coats, for lack of a fancier term. I do sort of wish I had lived in the Victorian era, but I do love the technology that we have today. So I try to bring a little bit of Victorian closet hermit panache to my work from home attire. And I'm also literally a transcendental, spiritual, intuitive mystic, and I'm also literally an ordained minister in the very real, and also, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, very fake religion of there's 2, which is why my brain gets confused and goes, which one do you want to say first? The Universal Life Church online and the what is it called? The Church of Latter-day Dudism. There it is. So, judge me if you must. Also, this is what I mean when I say I sort of cosplay my character, the Incorrigible Mr Zeppo. I have not been sitting, and I will not proceed to sit in my pajamas all day long like a lazy, stinky slob, you judgmental member of the audience. I see you over there thinking that about me. It's a bit. It's a costume. Imagine me doing a presentation in a theater on stage with lighting and sound and this costume, which I don't wear home. It gets hung up and dry cleaned and get ready. And, it makes sure if it looks dingy, it's because a costume creator made it look dingy on purpose, whilst it remains very clean because it gets laundered every night. And that's the sort of thing I'm trying to craft in the Imaginarium of our minds when we sit together, folks, and enjoy an episode of the Almost Daily ZenCast. And I now bid you a fond farewell and a momentary adieu. And instead of playing outro music, we'll just play a little bit of Sparkling on the Cosmic Vibes, a DJ Z track from Future Retroism, if I'm not mistaken, created on the Remix Live pop punk audio asset collection, plus a little bit of DJ Z proprietary magic sprinkled in. Here you go, folks. And we'll only tease you, because the longest track will only tease you a little bit to play the show out, and then we'll be back again in the not too terribly distant future with part 3. And like I was starting to say, you've gotten this far. You've been hanging in there with me. Stick with me, folks. My analysis of this show actually gets snarkier. I was going to say better, because I'm modeling after Eddie Izzard's Stick With Me, my story gets better. That wasn't the right cadence, but I'll stop. Here we go, friends. Sparkling on the Cosmic Vibe. DJ Z, a select cut from Future Retroism. by you, scruffy-looking nerf herders. Hang tight. We will be back with part 3. And you wanna catch this. Not to overhype my own hype and my own nonsense, but from what I recall about rambling last night into the third part, I get pretty vicious about some of the things that I found disappointing in episode 1. But I also come full circle to cherish and celebrate things that are what's going on with this new show, etc. Connect the dots with some of the outlining emotions, media stuff, though discussing the way. And I'm sure, as I want to do, given the format I'm tinkering with here, I will probably interrupt myself on occasion to expand, unpack, expound on, or dramatically derail my own thinking and take you on some additional tangents, as is part and parcel of this show. As always, thank you so much